This centuries-old tradition is feeling the heat of a modern conflict. So is Europe. We may not be in the EU anymore, but we're united in concerns over energy. Today, EU ministers agreed for their countries to cut gas use in case Russia turns off the taps, accusing President Putin of using gas as a weapon. And from Brussels to here in Bath, the winter looks uncertain.
This year was 12,000, and then we've got quotes here. So it goes from 60, 58, 72. These are all different quotes.
And that's starting from September of
Yeah.
the year. It's a huge increase.
Massive.
Wholesale gas prices have soared since Russia invaded Ukraine, and with it, energy bills.
I am worried, but I will see us through. I've seen us through before. I've done Airbnb to save the business. I've done everything to save this business.
Annette says they have a plan B and are in the process of switching from gas to electric furnaces. Europe is hoping it has a plan to save gas too, cutting a deal with EU members to voluntarily reduce gas use by 15% from Monday to next March.
I think it's an important, very important next step. It shows that Europe stays united to Putin and to Russia. You won't split us. So this is the important signal of the day.
The meeting took on a greater sense of urgency after Russian energy giant Gazprom announced it was further cutting energy supplies through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline due to maintenance.
Well, we can't deny that there is going to be a ripple effect on the UK. The UK is physically connected to the European market, and so when gas flows around that market, of course, the ripple of prices goes with it.
A group of MPs says the government's support package to help with rising energy costs is no longer sufficient. In Bristol, parents at this council-funded playgroup are relieved to have somewhere to go with their children this summer that doesn't cost money. And a free lunch takes a bit of pressure off tight household budgets. Tim has 5 children and says they're cutting back to save for rising winter bills.
I don't know how we're going to manage about the heating in the houses. Yeah, so I think we have to make a lot of difficult decisions on that time, when times comes anyway.
Are you having to make tough decisions now?
We do actually, yeah, because we have to try and budget what we have. And budgeting is not easy at all, because with the kids anyway. And, you know, when they want some stuff, you can't afford for them, you know.
Today, the Business Committee is warning millions of people will fall into unmanageable debt this winter. Their report is making a number of recommendations, including replacing the market-wide price cap with a discounted social tariff for vulnerable customers, increasing support packages and allowing prepayment meter customers to pay for energy after they've used it, and for a long-term solution, bringing in a national campaign to insulate people's homes street by street. The government say they've introduced an extraordinary package of support to help households.
Hot food, wrapped food. Yeah.
Elise Scratchley says increasingly local families are asking for more help with food.
We've been doing a play session regularly each week, and so over the last sort of 3 months it's become more prominent that people are needing the assistance that comes their way.
On the continent, they're rationing gas by directive. The UK government hasn't said if they'll do the same, but these families are already rationing through necessity as prices continue to rise.
Well, I've been speaking to the chief executive of the energy supplier E.ON here in the UK, Michael Lewis, and I began by asking how high he anticipates energy bills could go this year.
So we expect bills probably to be above £3,000, up to £3,200 come the next price cap in October.
What happens if people can't afford their bills? Will you be pursuing them? Will you cut them off?
Well, we won't be cutting customers off. We talk to them and try and organise a structured payment plan, which may mean that they pay less in the short term so that we try and help them. The kind of increases we're seeing now are unprecedented. In my 30 years in the energy industry, I've never seen anything like it. And that's why we previously called for government intervention. And I think we're going to have to see more government intervention to help customers ride through this extraordinary peak in wholesale prices we're seeing as a consequence of the situation in Ukraine, which is also feeding into power prices.
I mean, you'll have seen the debate last night where, I mean, Liz Truss, if she becomes Prime Minister, isn't talking about extra direct payments in the way that we've seen before. She's talking about helping other ways through tax cuts, other ways of putting more money in people's pockets. Is that going to work, do you think, when it comes to energy bills?
Well, I think it very much depends on where those tax cuts are focused. What we need to see is help for the poorest people in our society. That means it needs to be focused on people who are struggling to pay.
Now, in Europe, they have committed to a 15% reduction in consumption. Do you think Britain could do that?
I think there are a number of things we can do. And fundamentally, by the way, energy efficiency is the way that not only do we long-term reduce our energy consumption, we also need it as a first step to delivering net zero. So it's a win-win in every sense. We've spent a lot of time and effort working with customers through schemes like ECO.
What is ECO? What does it actually do?
The energy company obligation allows us to invest in things like cavity wall insulation, in loft insulation, in improving boilers to make them more energy efficient. And this is the single biggest tool we have to drive down energy bills. And if we don't up our investment in energy efficiency, we will never get off gas and we will never get to a position where we can drive towards net zero.
I mean, isn't the sort of the simple one that everyone could do is just run their boiler less hot? And, you know, there hasn't been a big communication about that, and you can save a lot of money that way.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. If we reduce the flow temperature of the hot water within central heating systems, we can significantly reduce consumption of gas by around 10 to 15%, depending on the starting point.
Isn't thermostats the other one? That if you spent a couple of £100 on every home getting smart thermostats, again, you would make a massive saving. I mean, you wonder why the energy companies aren't just doing this automatically for everybody.
Well, we do this through the ECO scheme. I already mentioned that we do things like loft insulation, cavity wall insulation. We also do smart thermostats through the ECO scheme. And absolutely, that's a really important intervention, and one which we use widely with customers to help them reduce their energy consumption.
Okay, and then finally, look, people will also look at energy company profits. Now, I know it's gone up and down during the pandemic, but over the last 5 years, your company's made hundreds of millions of pounds in profit. Are you making too much profit?
That's actually not correct. Over the last 3 or 4 years, we lost nearly £1 billion. We only came into profitability again last year after 3 years of very significant loss making. Our profit is regulated under the price cap to a maximum amount, and we are doing all we can to make sure that we have a sustainable, profitable business so that we can invest for the future in things like ECO, in things like helping customers get to net zero, and investing in technology like heat pumps and solar panels.
Do you think the regulator's been negligent in allowing all these casino gamblers to have come into the market who then went bust and you had to take on their customers?
Well, we made no secret of the fact that we were critical of the previous regime under Ofgem. We don't think that there were enough financial controls on new entrants. We don't think that their risk-taking behaviour was properly managed. Absolutely, there was a failure in regulation. We now need to move forward.
Do you have confidence in Ofgem?
Our discussions with Ofgem over the last 9 to 12 months since this crisis started have been very, very constructive. And I think, yes, we are moving in the right direction. And I'm confident that we will move towards a more sustainable market over the mid to long term.
Michael Lewis, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, spiralling energy prices are hitting economic growth across the world, with the IMF warning today the global economy is teetering on the edge of recession. It's slashed forecasts for growth, with the UK now set to be the weakest performer amongst large industrial nations next year. Our economist Neil MacDonald is with me. What's the IMF saying?
The IMF's main message is that the global economic outlook is now increasingly gloomy and uncertain. So today it's given us its new economic forecasts, and it now sees the world's 3 large economies, the United States and China and the Eurozone, all stalling at the same time. And the situation is particularly weak here in the UK. So the IMF now thinks that in 2023, the UK economy will grow by 0.5%. In a better year, you'd hope for more like 2%. And then when you compare it to the forecast for the other 6 big industrial nations, you can see that we're currently very much bottom of that league. Now, that's not a great place to be, but to be fair, the IMF has actually lowered its forecast for all these countries today.
So is the problem just inflation, or are there other things in play?
Inflation is the major problem, and it's a problem that keeps on getting worse. So if we go back about 18 months, we can show you how the IMF was forecasting inflation, and you can see that basically it's as flat as a pancake. But as we roll forward every 3 months, you could see how the IMF has continuously increased its forecast for inflation. And obviously the higher inflation is making us all poorer. It means the basics of life, the food, the petrol, the gas are all getting more expensive. But in response to this, of course, central banks are now raising interest rates by more than the IMF was expecting. So that's creating another drag on economic growth.
Is this as bad as it gets?
Well, no, the IMF actually went out of its way to say that there were risks to even this gloomy scenario. One of them, of course, being this whole issue about whether Russia might cut off gas supplies to Europe, which it says would lead to rationing, and that would lead to this toxic combination of lower growth but higher inflation. We don't know if that's going to happen, but the IMF is clear that it wouldn't take much to tip its low growth scenario into an outright recession.